Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to this, the part 7 it now is in our Marketing Society Global Conversation series. My name is Sophie Devonshire and I'm the CEO of the Marketing Society, and I'm delighted to be hosting today. We started this series, this Global Conversation series, back in April last year at the start of the UK first lockdown. Hey, remember that time, everybody, when we were all in total lockdown? It's been a long time since then, and we've been through a lot together. And across those months, we've also had a number of global conversations like this. And I know from talking to a number of you, a number of our members, that you really appreciate the idea that we can bring together some global perspectives, some insights and some inspiration from around the world to talk about some of the subjects that really matter to marketers right now. Our Global Conversation series allows marketers to explore some of the opportunities and a lot of the challenges that are being presented to us all at a global level. We've talked about the economy, we've talked about long-term impact and sustainability, team management, diversity and inclusion, future-proofing, and lots more. Every month we're talking about the issues that are affecting marketers at a global and at a local level. This month, we're exploring how to drive effective creativity with less resources and fewer resources and less budget. It's a topic that's on a lot of people's minds. And we know that as a society, when we bring together marketers to share their perspectives and their stories, that helps speed up our own ideas. It helps speed up success. By having the conversations together, we can help each other do well in our careers, get through tough times, and perhaps inspire different ways of doing things. So I'd like to introduce today and introduce our great panelists. We're going to be talking about how your business can make sure that with budgets and teams being cut at the moment or being pressured, we can still find ways to leverage creativity and cut through the noise with cost-effective and innovative solutions. So we're bringing together 4 fantastic marketing leaders from our global community to discuss this subject. I don't know quite what we're going to say, but it's going to be interesting. I know there's going to be lots of ideas, and I know we've got 4 brilliant panelists to have a good conversation with. But I also know we've got a great number of people who've joined from home today. So thank you, everybody, for joining in with this. I suspect each and every one of you will have ideas as well and stories to share about how to look at creativity at low cost. We would really love to make this as interactive as possible. You may have some questions as we go, and there are, of course, ways to communicate that. On Zoom, you've got your Q&A function there. So if, as we go, you have questions for any of the panelists, please come and put your questions on the Q&A part of the Zoom. But what we'd love you to do as well is just come and say hello on chat, because I know there are some really interesting people dialing in from all around the world. Come and say hello. Tell us where you're dialing in from. And please, before we get into the big global conversation, let's just share a couple of positives. Please come on to chat and tell me, is there something that your team has done across the last month or across the last few months that you feel really proud of? Share some positivity with us. Tell us what's been happening that's made you feel positive and what your team has been doing. Great to see you, Kamal from Dubai. Who else is out there? Tell us what you've been doing or what your team's been doing that's made you feel proud. Hi, Darren. We've got some people from Hong Kong, Dubai, all different parts of the world doing different things. What's making you proud? What's your team done that's made you feel proud? Please do share that on chat as we go. And don't forget the chat function is there. You will have comments to add, points that our panelists are making that you violently disagree with or that you agree with. Please use the chat function and tell us what you're thinking as we go. It's really great to have everybody here today, and I hope you're going to enjoy the conversation. Now, it is my great pleasure to welcome our fantastic contributors today. First up, our first panelist is Jason Leavy. Jason is the Senior Vice President, International Growth at Vice Media, and he's one of our board members in the United Arab Emirates, although he's recently moved back to the UK from Dubai. And Jason is passionate about purpose-driven work and believes in remaining constantly curious. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Great to be here.
And you've got a great jumper on today as well. So show that to everyone.
Repping it loud and proud.
Great to see you, Jason. Next, I am going to move back over to the UAE to welcome Cherry Gore, who's the Senior Vice President and Head of Brand Strategy and Communications. Hi, Cherry. And Cherry joins us from First Abu Dhabi Bank and the UAE, and has the most amazing amount of experience in building brand equity for market leaders in the banking and energy industries, including British Gas and Standard Chartered Bank. What's the temperature in Dubai today, Cherry? Is it lovely there?
We're creeping up to the 30s today. It's very warm, but humid, guys, so you're not missing too much.
Great to have you here, Cherry. I'd also like you all to welcome now Matthias Blume, who is the Group Marketing Director for Southeast Asia and South Pacific Operating Unit at the Coca-Cola Company. Matthias is also a board member in our Singapore hub, and he's successfully led a number of high-profile brands and has a real love for recruiting and developing talents to build world-class teams. Hi, Matthias.
Hey, good evening from Singapore.
So I'm sure that your team has done things that you feel proud of in the last few months. I look forward to hearing a bit more about that as we move on. And last but not least, please welcome Alison Payne, who is the Vice President for Marketing and Mexican beer portfolio at Heineken, who is joining us from the US.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Allison.
Hi. Great.
I love what Alison's done, because she has this incredible passion for growing and taking the iconic brands that exist and stretching them into new categories. So she's worked with all kinds of global brands, I think, including Guinness, Smirnoff, Special K, Lay's and Doritos. So brings lots of perspectives to the conversation today. Welcome, Alison, welcome, Cherry, welcome, Jason, and welcome, Matthias. So, COVID-19 has had a huge impact on so many different businesses across the last year, and on their budgets and their spend, forcing companies to think creatively with less resource. How have you had to adapt and innovate during this time to still create effective marketing? Matthias, perhaps I can go to you first. What have you been doing to make it work?
I think a lot was pivoting, getting faster. I mean, there's so much change over the last couple of months, and going into lockdown, going out of lockdown, that really speed has been at the core, and with that focusing. And I think one of the big things that we've been doing is we've tried to do more things in-house, and that then obviously drives creativity at a lower cost, but it drives creativity at a higher speed in many cases, and often more fit for purpose, especially in a reality where we were really revisiting our entire brand calendar, activation calendars across brand, reprioritizing. So speed was really one of the things that we brought back into the business, and as we were changing.
So actually coming out of what felt like a negative to force you into bringing things in-house has increased your responsiveness as well.
Yeah, speed and focus, I think, are the two key things.
Brilliant. So a clear way of doing it is to change the way in which you do things, bring it in-house and get the focus that's there. I mean, Cherry, tell us a little bit about what's happened for you in Abu Dhabi Bank and what you've had to do within the organisation.
Yeah. I think so. I think much like Matthias just mentioned, speed is a huge factor here. So that's always been there, and also working for a big bank where we're used to having our marketing budgets cut first. So there's always that level of creativity that we need to bring to the forefront. So for us, really, it was about leaning on the brand. It was the first time really as a bank that we thought we have to think differently. So rather than us being viewed as a sales tool or a sales engine that supports the product, we were actually much more focused on the brand as a team. So, and so that goes across the leadership team as well. So we were at the core of our strategic thinking was about our purpose, building community. That was very, very important to us. So it was about what we do beyond the bank. So for the first time, it was refreshing to not talk just about sales, but actually lean on some of our CSR initiatives and some of our kind of wider initiatives and sponsorships that we had not tapped into enough before. So a good example as well is in terms of understanding the responsibility of our network and making sure that we leaned on our resources. So allowing small businesses, for example, to use our platforms to advertise, whereas that was something that we hadn't opened up before. So we're thinking very differently and very uniquely, and the building a community was at the heart of everything we did last year, and that's very much continued onto this year.
Fascinating, isn't it, the way in which things you've invested in the past to build the brand and think about those things are now paying out when you need to move fast and when you have less money around to be able to build into that. But again, thinking differently in that human understanding of what really matters and the community side of it all. And that can't have been easy as well to get everybody to not panic and build on the brand. So the responsibility of marketing leaders to shift people that way.
Absolutely.
And Alison, I guess for you, this has been a huge change as well. What have you done at Heineken to adapt to the pressures?
Yeah, I mean, we've had to respond to what I'd call like the fundamental shift in consumer behaviour. We're from a category that relies on social interaction, and when obviously the shutdown happened, we are like major sponsors of sporting events, and obviously they weren't live, or music events were not happening. So we had to do, as Matthias said, a complete rework of our plans, and be very creative with how we moved with what we call the speed of culture, but at the speed of our consumer in terms of how they were adapting their behavior. So we pivoted to live streaming of music events behind one of our brands, Tecate. We sponsor college football, and tailgating wasn't happening in the US, so we had tailgating at home kits going out. So we became much more creative and agile in how we built our plans to completely adapt to the new reality of the pandemic.
So interesting, isn't it? Because actually, whatever all the businesses have had to do is respond to the fact that the consumers are changing and their patterns are changing. So again, the role of the marketer in the business is incredibly important to make sure that the business is able to respond to that. Yeah,
exactly. And we're thinking now ahead. What happens when the majority of the population is vaccinated, and what will that new normal be, and how does our marketing plans respond to that new normal as well? Like, is everyone going to be up for going to Coachella, or is there going to be some hybrid model going forward? So that's what we're planning for 2021 and beyond.
But in a world where there's no certainty, because we don't quite know, I think there are lots of people inside businesses panicking, but probably those who've worked in marketing who've always had to work with uncertainty are better able to cope with that, exactly. Anticipate it. And Jason, with that increased competition on consumer attention, how have you been thinking creatively, and what are you prioritising to make sure you stand out to reach your consumers?
Yeah, it's a great question. I probably should preface it by explaining, rather than make any assumptions about Vice Media Group, because we operate a number of different lines of business. So I'll address this primarily through Virtue, our creative agency, where from my admittedly biased perspective, this has actually been an amazing period in terms of stimulating some great creative work. So look, I think we all know that the fundamentals in some respect don't change. What is the brand challenge? What are those audience behaviors? And ultimately, what's the value proposition? Because again, we spoke about this before in terms of the illusion of cheapness. And I think, again, it has to be driven ultimately by value rather than cheapness, the conversation. So we've seen that switch in audience behavior, and I think that's really informed a lot of our initiatives. So for example, we saw it in our work with L'Oréal Paris, with Signature Faces. We created a virtual makeup experience with its own filters, which I think was a godsend for certain people on Zoom. So, so I think there's a great truism. You look at that audience behavior, you look at the opportunity for the brand connect in a meaningful way and a cost-effective way. And certainly the impact of that has been absolutely phenomenal in terms of engagement levels. Another particular favorite of mine was a collaboration we did with the DDR Museum in Germany around the Berlin Wall. So as most of the people on this call will know, it's 30 years since the Berlin Wall fell. Their challenge, 29% of the German population was born after the wall fell. So you've got a whole generation growing up not necessarily understanding its symbolic significance and its importance. So again, how do you engage with that young audience in a meaningful way? Is this a time for billboards? Is this a time for very sensible public sector style messaging? No, we felt this was a fantastic challenge. And so we went on to Minecraft Earth. We're the first brand to develop an educational tool for Minecraft Earth. Again, to be very clear, because of the Vice brand is a double-edged sword. It's perceived as cool in certain sectors. I think the really important thing to stress with Virtue is that some of these activations may sound cool, but ultimately they're driven by that brand challenge and being as effective as possible, and certainly within those cost parameters. So again, leveraging AR, leveraging the interactive opportunities that Minecraft offers up to reach an entire new generation in a way that simply I don't think would have been possible through other more traditional methods. And I guess, Sophie, you spoke about purpose being very important to me, and it is. And I think it's certainly something that if you work within VMG, it's why many of us have ended up here. It's waves and strays from other agencies, other publishers, etc. But I think, again, crucially with Virtue, there's recognition that it has to be brand purpose. And I think the past 12 months have been an amazing opportunity for brands to really stand up and show that awareness and to use a marketing society phrase, to be brave. So whether it's the work we've done with McDonald's in Austria in terms of sustainable swimwear collection made from plastic lids and straws back in July, obviously, because I wouldn't like to try swimming in Austria in February. We've got an amazing experiential team who've been working extensively with Target in the US to do a series of virtual masterclasses to allow Target mentors and coaches connect with young African-American female entrepreneurs, to offer them coaching and mentoring and allow them to connect and collaborate with one another. So I think, again, that's been very powerful. So I think it is about creativity in its truest sense, in terms of turning what has undoubtedly been a huge challenge into unprecedented opportunity. And I think within those parameters of budget, ultimately being driven by value and effectiveness.
So many interesting things in there, and in what everybody's saying here in terms of how that challenge has driven opportunity. And some of it is about speed, so about pace and what's being delivered there. Some of it is going back to purpose and what's grounding you to make that easier. This point about value versus cost, I mean, incredibly important framing probably for all of us. But what I love from Alison's examples and yours there, Jason, is that concept that in some ways constraint drives creativity. The fact that we have less, or we have to do things differently is forcing us to look at where the opportunities are with new technology or and using that. I mean, that's the gift that we have at the moment, is actually we can communicate in different ways thanks to what's happened with technology, and that I know is helping everybody. But there's been clearly a change for all of us in the way in which we're talking to our teams and thinking about how we're doing it. Do you think there's been a change, a really, really significant change for consumers in terms of what they expect to see when it comes to creative marketing? Cherry, what about you? Do you think there's been that shift in consumers in the UAE?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, Sophie. So I think that point around value and purpose couldn't be more truer today. So especially for a bank. So I think banks are looked at as evil necessities at the best of times, and people weren't expecting, I guess, some of the measures that we did put in place last year. be it relief measures, be it deferral of loan payments. But I think, just from a bigger picture perspective, the market is so saturated here. If you were to do a blind taste test when it comes to some of the banks here, really, you've got to really be hard pushed in terms of what each one really offers, and we're very much aware of that. So I'm sure there's colleagues from other banks on the line that may be nodding away. So our challenge really here is to really differentiate ourselves. So one of those points of differentiation is really just cutting through the noise now and working with all our product teams and working laterally across the group to speak in a much more human way. It's not just about the selling, it's not just about the purpose-driven marketing and communication, but it's also, if you're talking from a collections point of view, if you're talking, a customer's asking a simple query and it may have a bit more of a complex response, it's just about getting a lot more human in our response to absolutely anything that we did. So I think this really forced us to do that and look at those touch points in a very different way. And not everything has to be public and online. Some of it has to be behind the scenes, and that culture piece that I think Matthias and also Jason touched on is really important and has really been at the heart of everything that we do here. So yes, I do think people, us and consumers, are looking to us to really not sell. They don't want to be marketed to anymore. They want to be told the truth, especially from banks, and they want to be told the truth in very simple ways.
So yet again, it's accelerating a trend that's there already, that move towards more authenticity, more human communications, human to human. But that's accelerated it for you and probably made things simpler, I guess, as well. And what about I mean, it must have shifted so much for your consumer, Alison. What's their expectations? Have they changed when you're thinking about your consumer in the US?
Yeah, I think, like Sherry mentioned, obviously, purpose-driven brands, and people looking for brands that support their causes, in particular during the as the pandemic unfolded. My brands have a very particular consumer target with the Mexican American consumer, who were disproportionately affected both from job loss and actual pandemic, a health impact. So we leaned into charitable support around with the Mexican American community. So that's one angle. I also think that consumers became a little more creative in and of themselves. When you can't socialize outside or go to your local pub or bar, people were finding ways to engage and socialize. And we actually started to use a lot more consumer generated content on our platforms. We lent into things like Pinterest, where we would never traditionally go, because that was a platform that consumers were leaning in towards for lots of different ideas. People were taking up hobbies and doing various things. So I do think our consumers became a lot more creative in the way they socialize and interact. And we were able to sort of spark marketing content from that creativity as well.
That's brilliant. How creativity at low cost, actually working with the co-creation, user-generated content, and it is amazing what new technology can do to allow that that democratization of creativity. It's, I think, one of the best things that we're seeing at the moment, and
exactly,
not just my teenage kids on TikTok.
No, I was going to say, it's not just TikTok, but it's across, people have been incredibly creative, and that has really sparked, our community management group, are able to really respond and generate a lot of content and engagement with consumers, because they're just so willing to reach out, through all these channels. Yeah,
and then it builds on that idea of community in a different way, getting people to work together. So there's that engagement there. I think it's a great way of getting that collaboration.
Yeah, but I think it's also very interesting to see how it is changing over the course of the last 9 or 10 months. I remember back in February, we made a decision to stop all of our advertising for the second quarter, and we donated all the funds to local charity organizations that were helping frontline workers, those in the biggest need. And obviously, when you look at countries in my territory, like Philippines, where you have a lot of day laborers, a lot of foreign domestic workers that then send their money, their income back home to fund families, that was absolutely critical. And it was very much in line with the value and the purpose of the company, which is about refreshing the world and making a difference. and refreshing, not just in the literal sense of the beverage. And the amount of media coverage, consumer feedback we got on just a press release, because we obviously had to go out and inform our media agencies, etc., that we were making that decision on very short notice, was tremendous. I'm pretty sure it would not work the same way today. We saw some of our markets in Latin America producing advertising with face masks. They didn't really pick up. And what I see in the last couple of weeks, consumers are almost in a pandemic fatigue. And yes, there's obviously a huge shift in behavior. There's a huge shift in expectation when it comes to live events. But especially when it comes to the expectations on advertising, what they want to see or what they not want to see, they almost want to see this world of a pre-pandemic. So we start seeing a bit of that shift as well in this part of the world, where we have in some of our countries been in some form of soft or tough lockdown since a year now. And that's really a big shift that we start seeing, where people don't want to be reminded anymore. Things that July last year felt tone deaf are now perfectly accepted.
It's fascinating. Thank you, Matthias. I love the story of what Coke did, and it was a global decision that then worked locally, and that I do think there's a lot going on at the moment where we need to get that balance right to make sure that the global local understanding is there. But what I'm hearing from all of you as well is, you know, the critical importance of being one step ahead, of seeing where things are going, because that shift has been so fast in terms of we need to get to not be tone deaf, we need to get the tone right, and trying to predict what next when people are talking about, you know, the Great Renaissance, the Roaring Twenties, you know, are we going to see that? I mean, I think that's a fascinating conversation to make sure that we're putting our money in the right place as we're thinking ahead. And just that sense I get from you there, Matthias, of being, you know, constantly on the pulse and listening. You know, it's more important now than ever for us to do that, to get the creativity right, because it landing badly is a risk between it all. I'm conscious you're talking about, you know, what's happened in your teams, and everybody has pivoted and moved fast and done amazing things, which is hard when you're working with your teams to make that happen, particularly, of course, that everybody is working remotely. I had an interesting conversation with one of our members recently, and their organisation has done well, but when we were talking about what he's struggling with the teams, he's saying, we can operate remotely, but I'm not sure we can create as easily. So because collaboration, of course, is key to the impactful creativity, and we're working remotely, I'm really interested to hear from you all what you've been doing to make sure that you're getting the most out of your teams and working creatively. Jason, anything that you guys have been doing that's helped with getting that creativity?
So I guess the hill that I will die on is the importance of the right culture. In terms of that acting as the right environment for creativity to flourish. So I think that's been a huge focus for us across Vice Media Group, but particularly with Virtue, and that's taken on formal and informal mechanics. So I think where we were fortunate is Virtue was already operating as a borderless agency pre-pandemic, so one P&L, so there was already a very high degree of collaboration. So we had a bit of a head start in that regard, in all honesty. But we still recognise the need to put in place some formal mechanisms to encourage that to flourish further. So, for example, one of the executive creative directors created a chit chat tool, an app on Slack, but again, enabled that sort of, I guess, water cooler moments virtually. And again, with no agenda, we're very much around just connecting, because I think one of the advantages we have, and I saw this firsthand recently, is with that global footprint. You know, for me to be able to speak to, we've got a fantastic team in APAC, and our Middle East team connected with them recently, just on a social level. And whether it's just those informal bonds that can still be formed, whether it's getting those insights, whether it's hearing about creative campaigns that have gone on in APAC that are then inspiring forwards in Middle East and Africa, it's just phenomenal to see. And I think you're also seeing that between the different lines of business within Vice Media Group. I think production's a great example. I mean, we all know the challenges of last year. I think we did a phenomenal job of navigating that. You know, we produced, I think, Pulse Films, for example, which was Agency of the Year in the UK with campaign, and in the US, with the Immortals is part of Vice Media Group. I think they did 70+ ad spots in the last 12 months. We've produced over 1,000 hours of content for brands during this period across the board. So, and I think a huge part of that has been through collaboration. So, you know, that could be in terms of issues like formats, you know, social first formats and graphics led, you know, that's very much a Vice digital piece, but sharing those insights with Virtue in terms of what's resonating with audiences. So you're getting that whole sort of beautiful flywheel of publishing group passing learnings onto the commercial side and then on to brand clients. And I think the latter point's really, really important. I don't think we should be too introvert about collaboration. I think one of the things that I've seen and really valued, and I'm sure this resonates with many people on this call, is that brands being so open to collaboration, you know, those existing clients and the potential clients. And I think that's absolutely critical in the process. And that willingness to be brave when you know, DDR Museum is a perfect example of what could have been, you know, a traditional public institution, but Minecraft, you must be joking. Absolutely not, you know. So I think, again, our depth and breadth allows us to really try and share as much as possible as true partners. So if we're getting insights from a young audience through Vice Insights Desk, we absolutely do see that as a responsibility to share that with our partners, even if there's no direct benefit. You know, this is part of a bigger thing at the moment. And I'll caveat that slightly by saying it shouldn't even be at the moment. I know we'll talk later about learned, but I really want to see that spirit of collaboration continue. And I think the final thing I'll say on it is empathy. You know, whether it's individuals, whether it's groups, you know, it's so important to have that. So again, I think we've tackled that pretty well. We've worked with a body called Sanctus to have coaches for our teams, and so for those individuals who need a safe space to talk, we've had those coaches in place for them from an external body. But crucially, unfortunately, at least one of those coaches comes from a media industry background. And so I think that's been really important in terms of having that support mechanic in place. And I think, again, to go back to the whole agency client scenario, I think empathy really needs to drive the way we work as well, in terms of, you know, so frequently in my experience, clients can be a force of one, you know, can be a single senior marketer in a highly pressurized business environment. And that's where, you know, it's a risk of lapsing into cliche. It's about walking a mile in their shoes. How best can we support them through insights, through sharing those wider learnings? I think that's so important. That spirit of being in it together, I think has never been more true than during this period. Yeah.
But at a time when people are pressured, it could go the opposite way. And I know you and I were talking about your jumper before we started the call. But I think that, you know, that again, if we look at trends that are happening, you know, we're moving from a leadership and business perspective that's always been about the art of war and battling each other and who's the enemy and how are we going to win, to realizing that creativity often does come from collaboration and sharing, you know. And even within the marketing society, you know, seeing our members with sessions like this, but with all kinds of sessions, openly sharing to give each other insights and inspiration to speed things up, the impact you then have is amazing. So there's some cultural points there, Jason, very important, you know, understanding empathy, building relationships, making sure that people are strong enough and working together. Are there some practical things? Matthias, what have you done to make sure that the creativity continues even when everybody's pressured and in different places?
I like what Jason just said in terms of a force of one. I mean, when you think about Coke, you usually think of 3-4 brands: Coke, Fanta, Sprite. But the reality is we have globally about 450, and in any given quarter, we will probably, in most countries, and the US is even higher number, activate 5, 6, 7 brands. So a big thing that we did for the second half of the year was really focusing all around brand Coke. Given that about 50% of our business in this part of the world sits in away from home, where people were just not being present. And we focused on shifting everything towards at home, shifting everything towards brand Coke. And this came through the entire organization. So it was a huge collaboration where we were breaking down the traditional silos, marketing, commercial, sales, etc., and really working collectively and seeing how do we have to change the entire brand price pack architecture, the way we were activating, the way we're communicating. And we spend a huge amount of time to understand which of the brand people had a job, in the sense that they were being busy versus were being actually removed out of what they were supposed to do the next day all of a sudden, and made sure that we just redeployed the resources. So we broke down the silos, worked much more as one coherent team, and we redeployed massively the resources, and made sure that really everyone knew what was the one thing that matters most, and that they had a role to play in there.
Nothing like a crisis for giving you good focus, but it is really important, yeah, to help everybody understand what's going to make the biggest difference, and the leadership role there to play about the focus. And interesting comments coming through on the chat here. And Nick saying that viewing the creative world as a collaborative system rather than a competitive hate fest is more likely to yield better work from happier people. Interesting point.
I couldn't agree more.
Let's get better work from happy people. Well, I mean, we all know the psychological barrier of fear. If people are feeling fearful and protective, they're not likely to be open to innovation and doing things differently. So I think that is a danger. Cherry, what about you? What have you done with the teams just to make sure that everybody's comfortable with being as creative as possible through this difficult time?
Yeah, so very similar to the colleagues on the call, really. So I think for us at the group level, back to the point I made earlier about us being part of the strategic thinking in the group that actually set the tone in terms of our response and our pivot as a result of the pandemic. So as a bank that's just gone through a merger, we're very used to quite a lot of change, but this was something that needed the full force of the 360 of the team. So us having a voice in that committee, talking about the fact that we cannot just afford to be not tone deaf with our customers, but also with our people. So that was something that was very important. So as a result of COVID, thankfully, we weren't negatively impacted, but morale certainly was. So people were, depending on the scale and where people are based, because we also have a network of roughly 10,000 employees across the globe. It depends, everybody's morale was very different depending on which geography you're in. So having that conversation openly, talking about the fact that we needed to nurture that capacity to really be empathetic to our employees as well as our customers and our other stakeholders was really important. But I just think to be more specific for my team, I think back to Jason's point, empathy, it was just having very normal and open conversations on a daily basis to begin with. There was no rules book for this. Everyone was going through it together. We wanted to, I think the tagline in our own team was, how do we turn this surviving into thriving? However cheesy that felt at the time, it was necessary to have everybody round a rallying cry within our own team. So that helped for momentum. And then practically to kind of feed that momentum across the businesses, it was about working to people's strengths. So in a time where I guess we didn't have as much agility as we were afforded last year, and we would have probably stayed in our lanes and continued to deliver against our very core KPIs and very structured objectives. But in this last year's world, certainly in the UAE, there was a bit more opportunity for our teams to look further afield. So I've had my teams work cross-functionally, sitting with risk teams. Cybersecurity was a huge risk for us last year. So understanding that, being a lot more empathetic to their needs and not just saying, hey, that's a risk communication, it's not so cool to talk about, and actually getting our marketing expertise and communication expertise into their shop and having the conversations in a much more agile way and in a very different
so unifying and bringing that together. I'm struck again by how how important it is to remember that great marketeers fundamentally have great human understanding and are interested in it. So we focus on externally who our audience is, but at times like this, to be able to support internally as well and make sure that that we understand the people we're working with can make such a difference to nurturing. Interesting use of words, thriving, the nurturing is what you need for creativity. but there's also, there's a practical nature as well. When we talk about being creative, often we are being creative with our budgets and making things happen. Alison, I'm interested in thinking about what we've done to produce work to be more innovative and cost effective. I was, I don't know if you all saw, there was a great example of what Disney had done in, I think, the 1970s when they were short of money. Hard to believe, but they were, to recycle some of their work. Have there been things that you've done to be a little bit more cost effective with how work is used, Alison?
Yes, certainly. I think you know, the lockdown for us helped. We had to sort of focus on, you know, really sweating our assets, because we couldn't create as much as we wanted to, either through budget restrictions or just literally production restrictions. So, you know, I always say that marketeers often get tired of their own content before consumers do. So we really took a hard look at what we had and whether we could reuse and potentially recycle. So we did edits. We have an in-house agency, so we were able to repurpose a lot of our assets. I said we also realized, as I said before, we relied on user-generated content for sure. And the other thing we did, and it's related to the earlier topic, was around collaboration across our, you know, we're a global company, so actually borrowing and stealing great ideas from other countries. You know, as the pandemic took different forms across different countries, and different countries were in different states of lockdown, you know, we stole great ideas about going back to the bars and how we support the bars from opening up from Europe that were already open in the summer. So we found a lot more open arm collaboration across the globe, and stealing great ideas within the Heineken system, more than we would have done if we'd had the budgets and, you know, we're sitting here in a sort of, you know, normal world.
Genius. Steal with pride, as I
yes.
think Steve Jobs used to say. But I mean, we see it over and over again that actually the Procter & Gamble phrase was search and reapply, but you know, there are ideas out there that either you can take directly from another country and apply it, which speed things up, or recombinant innovation, where you put two ideas together, even better. But you know, I would emphasize again the importance of staying curious and being connected to other stories and things. We see it within the marketing society, people picking up an idea and taking it somewhere else and making it happen. There's a couple of questions coming through. I don't know if, I think there's a question from Matthias and Nick Elliott. I think, would you like to come on and just ask your question of the panelists? Are you there, Nick?
I am, yes.
I see you.
No, I don't know where.
Are you naked or are you?
No, I'm fully clothed.
Oh, we've lost you. I think there's a connection problem. Shall we ask your question for you, Nick? Are those there?
No, okay. I'm prepared. Just to reassure you that I really am not naked. Yes, fascinating discussion so far. I was just wanting to sort of veer it towards, because picking up on the comment around bringing things in-house. Now, obviously, that's not saying that agencies aren't amazing at what they do, but because of efficiencies, agility, and things like that, that it is making more sense with the need for so much more content, right? That it does make sense to bring some things in-house. So I was going to be asking, I was going to ask around where would you draw the line of what you bring in-house and what you don't? But I think an easier question to answer probably is, what has been a good success story of what you have brought in-house and what has been created in-house?
Matthias, do you have a perspective on that one, or does someone else want to answer?
I think I can go ahead.
I would say we've defined it quite tightly in, you know, we have our agency of record help create sort of the big creative idea, and that if we need very quick adaptations, obviously the US is such a big place and each state is different. So if we need particular adaptations for Texas versus Florida versus, so we tend to use our in-house agency to do a lot of what I'd call localized, you know, more personalized adaptations off a core creative idea that has been established by our, you know, agencies of record. So that's where we've had the most success, with a very tight collaboration between our agency and our external agency and our internal agency. Our internal agency is only, I think, 2 years in, so they're gradually taking on more and more as they understand the brands and can adapt. But that's where we've had the most success, a very clear delineation between our external agency really owning the big creative idea and then the internal adapting.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alison. Great.
Yeah, just building on this, I think that there are two relatively recent examples that also connect a little bit to what we were just talking earlier in terms of focus and reusing. Historically, we've done in the 15 markets here, everyone was doing their own point of sale material. And obviously, there's a huge overlap of what they actually need. And a lot of times they were doing things that weren't necessarily needed. So we've taken a look at what is really needed and reduced the number of different content pieces needed from a point of sale material perspective. But then a lot of the adaptation we have done locally in-house with our designer, or then with one dedicated agency instead of having 10, 15 different partners. So I think there are a number of things that are easier to bring in than others. I think the moment you start talking about something like Clubhouse, which is new, might be much more difficult to do in-house and really even think about it, unless you have someone that happens to be super excited about it. But especially I think when it comes to new technologies, new platforms, it's more difficult. And I think you need more someone from the outside to bring in that knowledge. But some of the basics I think are much easier to do often in-house and much faster. But I think agility is the key thing. It's not necessarily about spending less money, because you spend it upfront to recoup it down the road. But we've always had a division at Coke between the brand marketing teams and the dedicated communications team. And a lot of those people do come from agencies originally. So in some form or shape, we have an in-house agencies for the last 20 years or so, but not necessarily from a production perspective, more from a coordination, from a creative strategy and these kind of lenses.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matthias. Thank you, Nick, for joining us. Good to see you. Glad you weren't naked. Excellent. So we're talking quite a lot there about a different version of this, which is actually, we've thought about cost to value, but now we're actually talking about cost to speed and speed. So prioritizing that understanding that sometimes agility is worth investing in, because overall that will give us, there's always this playing up and playing down what the real opportunity is for us, and that constant thinking about it. I'm just thinking as well again about this idea of what else you can do to adapt to produce work to be that bit more cost effective. Jason, are there other things that you've done to take advantage of the challenges?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I love what you just said, Sophie, about agility, because whenever we're on a panel like this, I'm trying to think about how the value exchange. I can sort of beat my chest and talk about VMG, but I think where possible, I like referring to actual work as proof points. And I think IKEA is a great example. We were made AOR for them in 6 markets, and then the pandemic hit. And I'd love this to be my quote, but this came from Emil, the creative director on the project at the time. And he said it was like building a plane while flying, trying to work out how we were going to be effective in role. And I think it just led us back into so much of what we've spoken about in terms of speed, agility, cost effectiveness. And I think in that situation, again, great creative insight was what many people wanted, particularly in the early days of the pandemic. Because I agree with Matthias completely in terms of we need to recognize the way that pulse is changing. And to your, Sophie and Alison's points about also being predictors of culture, I think that's a really important role for senior marketers, to be able to look ahead and look around the corner. And what Emil did very early on in the process and his team was conceptualize the rhythm of life, that actually the everyday routines, which historically may have been viewed as boring, became really important anchor points. And within themselves had a certain low level beauty, and comfort and reassurance. So we actually took sort of, I guess, inspiration from that routine, and certainly the routine of the new normal, though I hate that phrase, I apologize, using it for the sake of brevity. So sort of, and again, back to delivering value and impact for the client, you know, because again, everything was centered around how IKEA's own products can help create that sense of well-being. And then again, a very important thing to IKEA and for us as Vice Media Group as a whole is the theme of sustainability. So that also ran as a DNA thread for all of it. So I appreciate that's unpacking a lot, but I think it's just a great example, I think, of where we were able to, in a new situation, able to collaborate really effective with the client to understand what really mattered to them. So back to the empathy piece again. Yeah. And to come up with a solution that was grounded in changing behavior and those insights. And engaged in a meaningful way with, again, that sense of brand purpose rather than just purpose generically.
Yeah. Yeah, and that sort of reflection as well for all of us on quite how much we've learned and quite how we've shown what is possible in the last few months. Yeah. Is outstanding.
That's exactly right. You know, would that campaign have been conceptualized 12 months previously?
So is it great?
Or certainly in that way, yeah.
Which reminds me, actually, everybody listening, we're encouraging as many people as possible to enter our Marketing Society Awards. The deadline is coming up. So share the stories of the great work you've done, please, because the more and more I hear about what's been achieved, the more I think we have to celebrate these things. There's also a point there that you're talking about, Jason, which just reminds me that great insights, getting to them can cost, but actually great insights can be priced, you know, you can just find them with the right people in the right way and the right thinking, so they don't necessarily have to cost so much. I'm conscious, Alison, of I'm really interested in some of the things you've been talking about reusing and recycling the content as well, because I know you said to me that marketers tend to get bored quicker of their content than consumers do. Do you think that's driven a change in the way in which you and the team see things in terms of continuing to be smart about what you're using?
Yes, I think, you know, we're looking at everything because we had to sort of, you know, completely tear up our plans and redo them. I think we are looking very closely at everything we create, you know, whether it's what is necessary, you know, and we've found, you know, as Jason mentioned, that we can be incredibly creative and reach more people with a clever idea, for example, that you know, that sort of was born out of the pandemic. You know, we had you know, we at last summer, you know, just coming out of the first shutdown, we talked about whether it was right for our brands to come back and insert themselves into the conversation. You know, people were more worried about their health and their jobs, and, you know, do we start talking about sort of getting out and socializing in a safe way? For Dos Equis, we put out the 6-foot cooler, the 6-foot cooler that was enabled, you know, to chill your beers, but with 6 feet distance between you and your mate. That was just a huge, like, PR sensation here in the US, and it was, you know, that creativity and that sort of like a very simple idea that just resonated with consumers at a time when they really you know, wanted to get sort of back outside and you know, chat with a few friends over a few beers, was just an example of a very, you know, I'd say cost-effective way, but a very clever way of engaging with our consumers that we may not have thought about at all, you know, if we'd you know, had our traditional marketing plans that we'd done for 2019. So that's just one example.
A great example of how things can come out of that insight. So I'm conscious we're starting to run out of time, so a lot to talk about. Just want to ask anybody who's listening, if you have heard anything today that you think particularly resonates with you, a phrase or an idea, or there's anything you want to add in terms of, you know, the big insights about creativity at low cost, please come and just share your one thing that you've heard today or that you're thinking about as a result on chat. We'd love to hear from you. And I'm going to ask our panelists to, for one final question, if I may, and if you can summarize it in a sentence for speed, that would be lovely. And the question is, we've been through all this. We're hoping that there is now change again, and that the Renaissance, the resurgence, the roaring 20s will change again. But what one behaviour or one key learning are you going to make sure that you and your team keep for the long term? One thing that you've got to make sure that you don't forget that you've learned? Maybe I'll start with you, Matthias. What's the one thing you're going to make sure you carry forward from this period?
Acting fast together.
Say that again.
So acting fast together. I think speed and collaboration.
Love it. Jason?
Matthias has nailed it, hasn't he? I would simply say, I would simply say I do think collaboration also infers something I think is incredibly important, which is abandoning of ego. I think that, again, creativity shouldn't just be restricted to creative with a capital C.
Okay.
I think the beauty of the right culture is that creativity can come from everywhere. And I think the one thing the pandemic has shown is that so many people want to be part of solutions, which for me leaves my position as an optimist justified.
I love that, although much longer than a sentence, Jason, but still excellent points.
Fair comment.
Cherry, what one thing would you make sure you hold on to?
For us, it's very clear. So it's just continuing that connectivity between brand purpose to business results. So they're not two different things, they go hand in hand. So for us, it's just about nurturing that value and making sure that everybody understands that across the business.
Nurturing the value, makes there. And Alison, what are you going to?
For me, it's about, being more acting like an entrepreneur. I think, the having to sort of redo our plans and be flexible and have one setback and pivot to something else and find a way, which is a very entrepreneurial spirit. I think I'd like to certainly keep that going forward.
Oh, this is fantastic. I've loved the conversation today. So many good things in here. We've talked about pace, we've talked about purpose, we've talked about the mindset shift you need to make to act like an entrepreneur, to be able to be open to ideas coming from anywhere, the importance of nurturing creativity in people and empathy, slowing down to connect, to go faster, and the opportunities that technology have given us, spotting the opportunities and what we can do when we recycle, search for ideas from elsewhere, think creatively about being creative. So many great ideas, everybody. Thank you so much. I wish we could talk for longer than this. Thank you, everybody. There will be a poll just about to pop up. Everybody who's listening, to tell us what you thought of today, but please also get in contact with me if you have any thoughts or feedback. I'm sophie@marketingsociety.com. And I would really like to extend massive thanks to Jason, Matthias, Allison and Cherry for an amazing conversation. We could have gone on and on, but thank you for all your insights today. And everybody listening, a couple of things coming up before you go. Please put in your diary, if you're interested, our 4th of March session. Just in time for International Women's Day, we have the second session in our Uplifters series, designed to make you feel optimistic and give you energy. This one is about what the future holds for women in marketing. And I know a lot of people have signed up already, and they aren't all women, which is fantastic. And the authors of a new book, Wonder Women, What Does the Future Hold for Women in Marketing, will be talking about this, together with Edwina Dunn, who's one of our Marketing Society Fellows and the founder of dunnhumby, Sandy Griffiths, who's the Marketing and Innovation Director at Diageo, and Andy Beattie, who is the Global Chief Marketing Officer at Petronas. Come and join us for that on the 4th of March, please. Don't forget to enter your brilliant stories into our Marketing Society Awards. And please, members, if you haven't yet received your invitation to the Coffee House, our digital platform where you can continue to have connections and conversations with people and share inspiration and ideas. The link is on chat, or get in touch with us and we'll send you the invitation to the Coffee House. Thank you very much to all my brilliant panelists. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in to listen today. Stay safe, stay creative, and we'll speak to you soon. Thank you.